Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The USC commitment sweatshirt comes back on Sunday afternoon. Chad Bowden and Lincoln Riley dipping their toes back into the transfer portal with a very familiar face. Former UCF cornerback Chasen Johnson committing to USC. Now, I think a lot of USC fans who are listening to this probably remember the name. Was committed to USC for about 12 hours in the winter portal window before flipping his commitment to SMU and then winding up back at UCF. We talked about this Friday afternoon just because I was very interested to get a gauge of, hey, how do the USC fans feel about USC potentially going back after Chasen Johnson? A lot of y'all were not a big fan of it. A lot of y'all said, hey, we kind of went this avenue a couple months ago, didn't work out, and it was funky. It was a very weird situation where I believe he committed to USC and then kind of like ghosted the coaching staff and ended up committing to SMU and eventually just went back to UCF. So it was a not ideal situation that we saw play out in the winter. And I want to start with this. Like, I totally understand USC fans looking at how that situation unfolded and saying, hey, plenty of other players to go after that we haven't had this experience with. I get that side of things, but I also get why USC kind of pursued Chasen Johnson once again. And I think it starts with this is the ideal portal edition that we've talked about with Chad Bowden throughout the last couple of weeks. Guy that has starting experience with 3 years of eligibility remaining. Look, if I were to give my elevator pitch in terms of why this makes sense for USC, it's a thin cornerback room for USC going into 2025. That doesn't mean it's a bad cornerback room, but it's relatively thin. And we know Chad Bowden cares a lot about competitive depth. Like, you have the opportunity to add a cornerback that has starting experience as a true freshman, that has 3 years of eligibility remaining to a position that you probably wanted to get deeper in heading into 2025. This, from a personnel standpoint, makes a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons. Then you just got to figure out the off the field stuff. The two things that make me feel good about USC going back after Chasen Johnson is, number one, Trevon Reed. USC's cornerbacks coach coached him at UCF last year. He knows Chasen Johnson very well. I believe, actually, was the reason Chasen Johnson decided to return back to UCF. And then Trevon Reed eventually went to USC. And so that's number one. That makes you feel pretty good about Chasen Johnson coming back. Like, Trevon Reed knows him. Trevon Reed would not be going after Chasen Johnson if he felt like this was going to be a problem. Number two, like Chad Bowden. Like, I think a lot of USC fans are, kind of taking the standpoint of, in Chad Bowden we trust. That's not a bad kind of frame of mind, because you look at Chad Bowden and what he's done over the last couple of months. He's earned our trust in terms of, hey, we trust that you're doing your due diligence and talking to Chasen Johnson, talking to the coaching staff and saying, hey, we think this will work out better the second go around. Because at the end of the day, Chasen Johnson's a good football player. You don't get on the football field at the Power 4 level for over 450 snaps as a true freshman unless you're not a pretty damn good player. So it does make sense. There are, from a personnel standpoint, there are certain things that make us feel better, at least make me feel better about adding Chasen Johnson in the spring. You have his position coach from UCF on staff. Chad Bowden ain't going to play games. I'm sure this was a conversation that he had not only with the players and staff, but also had with Chasen Johnson and his representation. Like, look, if we're going to pursue you again, what happened in the winter when I wasn't here, it ain't going to happen again in the spring. Want to get a little bit more into Chasen Johnson, talk a little bit more about this situation, talk about where this cornerback room sits now going into 2025 before we get into it. As always, to the USC fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. And look, I would, as always, completely respect the USC fans who disagree with my evaluation of this, because I totally see where you guys are coming from too. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. It's been a very busy week talking this USC program. I've had an absolute blast. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, there's one more thing that I want to talk about in terms of the off-the-field conversation before we just stick to the football field here. In this era of college football, it's very easy for us to just blame the player when a lot of times in the transfer portal, there's so many other outside actors that are in the ears of these young kids. Like at the end of the day, Chasen Johnson was coming off his freshman year. He's a 18, 19-year-old kid that was trying to figure out the best landing spot for him after that first year at UCF. You got agents in his ear. You got parents in his ear. He was from Florida. You got other coaches in his ear as well. And I'm not necessarily excusing how Chasen Johnson reportedly dealt with the situation with USC a couple months ago. That's not how you want to handle it. No doubt about it. There are a lot of other outside factors where, you know, I'm sure that Chad Bowden and USC, I think we talked about this Friday, like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me once, shame on me. And it's like, hey, we're going to make sure that this second go around in terms of pursuing Chasen Johnson is going to be cleaner than it was a couple of months ago. Because again, I think Chad Bowden has earned that right for us to say, hey, we trust how you're going about building this USC roster because you've earned our trust over the last couple of months in terms of how you've operated. So that's my take on the extracurricular conversation around Chasen Johnson. I think there are, with Chad Bowden in this new front office in place, just a more professional, clean operation from USC. Having his former coach at UCF, Trevon Reed, on USC staff, there are things in place that make me trust that the off the field stuff is taken care of on the Chasen Johnson end. Now, as a football player, is this not the ideal football player for Chad Bowden to go after in the portal? He's made it very clear that we are not going to pay a bunch of money for these 6-month rental guys. Even if they're good football players that make our team better immediately in 2025, we're going to build this thing the right way and we're going to stick to our process. You bring in Chasen Johnson. This is a guy that I truly believe can compete for a starting spot at the boundary cornerback position, but at the same time, as a guy that has 3 years of eligibility remaining with USC. Like he's going to be back with this program in 2026, potentially back in 2027 as well. You look at the additions that USC has made under Chad Bowden, Chasen Johnson, 3 years of eligibility, Zach Williams, 3 years of eligibility, Tamir Robinson, 3 years of eligibility, Kennedy Urlacher, 3 years of eligibility. The 4 transfer portal additions that USC has made are all the guys that are going to come in and make an impact on USC in 2025. I think Zach Williams could be the wide receiver 3. I think Tamir Robinson is going to be a very quality depth player at linebacker this year, as well as Kennedy Urlacher. Chasen Johnson, at the very least, depth potentially starter. All of these guys are going to provide value for USC immediately in 2025. But at the same time, they're all probably going to be back in 2026 and probably some of them going to be back in 2027. That's how we want to do this. That's how Chad Bowden wants to do this. He made it very clear. Now, from a roster standpoint, I'm going to kick Chasen Johnson to the 3 deep. I'm going to give the edge to Braylon Connolly and Marcellus Williams. I'm going to give the edge to the players that were with this program in spring practice. From a pure ability standpoint, Chasen Johnson showed us as a freshman that he can play at the Power 4 level. And I think another note to add with all these guys that have multiple years of eligibility is they're getting better as football players. You go back to the David Bailey discussion we had a month ago. David Bailey, very, very good football player. How big's that step going to be when him going into his 4th year? And you see these programs bringing guys who are on their 4th or 5th or sometimes 6 years of playing college football. Like, how much better are they going to get coming to USC? You talk about all the young talent that USC has added in the portal. Like, they're players that have shown us they're good college football players, but are all still developing, like all still getting better. And Chasen Johnson going into year 2 of his college football career, still getting better as a football player. The second conversation here is, USC's looking for who's going to start at nickel too. I know a lot of USC fans like Christian Pierce. Adding a depth player at the boundary cornerback spot potentially allows you to do this and say, hey, DJ Harvey might be his best fit at nickel. We know he can play cornerback on the boundary because we've seen him do it a lot at San Jose State. Go back to his time at Virginia Tech. He was a nickel defender. So you could say, hey, we'll kick DJ Harvey down to nickel, maybe add a guy like Marcellus Williams to start. Now we get Chasen Johnson in our 2 deep. It gives you a little bit of flexibility in terms of your best 5 getting on the football field in the secondary. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I'm saying it gives you that option in 2025, and that's what you're trying to get to. That's why Chad Bowden's taken such a big class in 2026. We want to build depth throughout our roster. So not only we're a deep football team that can withstand 12, 13, 14 games, making a run in the college football playoffs, but we want to be multiple. We want to have the ability to try to maximize our team. If you're not a deep football team, you can't start tinkering with that stuff because you don't have the adequate depth. And at the very least, Chasen Johnson gives you the depth to be a little bit more experimental in terms of, hey, how do we want this defense to look? What's the best form of this defense? Now, I'd be surprised if DJ Harvey kicks in the nickel, but I think it opens up that possibility, which could be the best version of this USC secondary. Now, Chasen Johnson as a football player, 452 snaps, really came on late. Again, you talk about guys who are getting better as football players. Chasen Johnson, like normally for a true freshman, didn't play much the month of September. October, November was a guy that was playing 50-plus snaps a game for UCF. Like, this was a guy that didn't really come off the football field all that often as a true freshman, which tells you like what Trevon Reed thinks of Chasen Johnson, what that UCF staff last year thought of Chasen Johnson. That's encouraging to me. Two things he has to clean up. Number one, missed tackle rate, 23.8%. Got to tackle better, especially in the Big Ten. 5 penalties. He's a little bit handsy sometimes. You can go back and watch some of the film. He is not afraid to use the length and physicality at the line of scrimmage. We just got to be able to rein that in. Look, I'd rather teach my defensive backs to be a little less physical than say, hey, you're not physical enough. And so there are some things that Chasen Johnson can clean up. But again, this kid's raw. This kid's green. He's only going into year 2. There's still a lot of development that can take place with a kid like Chasen Johnson. To me, it makes sense from a personnel standpoint. You probably only had 4 cornerbacks that you trusted to play in 2025. Now you had a 5th one that has 3 years of eligibility remaining. This 12-minute episode was basically my pitch that as from a pure football player's perspective, I think this makes a lot of sense for USC. Now, again, there were some off-the-field stuff you probably had to work through. Again, I think Chad Bowden has kind of earned our trust, and I think having Trevon Reed on this staff also makes you feel good about it. I would expect this to be the last transfer portal edition for USC. I like the haul. Like, if you were to kind of give a quick grade, it wasn't super flashy, and we kind of knew it wasn't going to be super flashy. I don't think USC wanted to pay, a guy like David Bailey $1 million to come into this program for 6 months. We'd rather allocate those funds to building the best class in the country in 2026. That's what we've seen from USC. And quite frankly, for USC to get back to where they belong as a program, that's where you have to allocate your resources. Trust the process, baby. That's kind of how I'd sum this thing up. And I think from a football perspective, this makes a lot of sense. We'll close it out there. USC fans, I'm sure many disagree. Please let it fly in the comment section. We'll chop it up. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.